Alrighty, I've got 11:01, so I think I'll go ahead and get started. I wanted to welcome everybody to this conference. Like I said, this is the first one of these that I've participated in that's virtual. I have participated in the original format of the Free Learning Conference, as it has been hosted here at App State. So I think we'll go ahead and get started. You can see the title of my talk, which is a bit of a mouthful, but hopefully it'll make sense as we move through. My goal for us today is to talk about a potentially different way of organizing your syllabus, particularly the course schedule portion of your syllabus. Now, I'm not going to be using any fancy technology tools or anything like that. So if you're hoping to see a new app or something, I'm not going to be sharing that, but I will be using technology that everyone has access to in some form or another, and show you maybe a slightly different way to conceptualize the format of a syllabus and exactly what it should accomplish for our students. Before I launch into that, though, a little bit of information about me. So here we go. I'm at Appalachian State, and I've been here since 2011. I am a recent associate professor. I just got tenure in the last year in the psychology department, and I am trained as a school psychologist. So I'm trained a lot in the science of teaching and learning, focusing on K through 12 populations, but really since I've been in academia, my interests have shifted completely, and I'm mostly interested in applying those kinds of ideas to college student populations. So that's me. I also work in our Center for Academic Excellence, who is sponsoring this conference today. That's what we call our Center for Teaching and Learning, and I am the coordinator for early career programs. So I do a lot of programming, helping new faculty, tenure and non-tenure faculty acclimate to the town, to the school, to academia, etc. Now, the classes I'm going to be talking about today, or the classes in which I use this particular syllabus, just to give you the context, they are educational psychology courses. And almost every semester I've been here, I've had two sections of those back to back on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So teaching it at 10 and 11 or 9 and 10, something like that. And in each section, I've got 50 students. So depending on the institution you're at, that might sound like huge, or that might sound very small. I view it as medium because we do have up to, in the 200s for a few classes on campus here. And then when I teach graduate students, which I also do, I can have as few as 4. So for me, this is medium, but I really, even though there are 2 classes, 2 sections, I view it as a single class kind of 100 students, particularly when it comes to grading and prepping and things like that. So that's just to give you the context. I think that most of this syllabus idea will work for any size course, will work for fully online, fully face-to-face, hybrid, all of that. Now, I'm also going to give you some grading ideas, which might get difficult if you go much more above 100 students. It might get a little too unwieldy. So just keep that in mind. But the rest of it, I think, will work for everyone. Okay, so that's kind of the deal there with who I am and who I teach and things like that. I guess I should also mention, you can see here's pictures of me teaching in the classroom I always teach in. Most of these particular students are training to become teachers. They are education majors, and they are taking the one psychology course that is required of all education majors. So I have people who are planning on being high school chemistry teachers sitting next to people who are planning on working in a preschool. So it really has to be a generalist course for students with lots of different types of interests and lots of different strengths, weaknesses, motivations, things like that. It feels like an intro class, even though it's technically not an introductory course. All right, so let's kind of jump into the idea here. So hopefully you guys are a little bit familiar with this Choose Your Own Adventure book. I'm sure we have lots of different generations represented in the audience today. I know that these were in my elementary school library. I remember them. And they were pretty compelling because if you're not familiar with it, the idea is that you read the first portion of the book and then it comes to a place where you're forced to make a choice. It kind of feels like the old school role player games. So you've come to a locked door. Do you want to open it or do you want to do something else? And depending on the choice you make, it sends you to a different place in the book. And so these books are really compelling for readers because you get to make so many choices in your reading experience. And then the other thing too, though, it's not really true that anything could happen based on your choices. Of course, the author, the architect of this reading experience, has made some very intentional choices, just like we do in our courses, to make sure that even if people take different paths, we all kind of end up at a same or similar place, or hopefully a place that is mutually acceptable to everybody involved. So that's why I like this metaphor for the way that I've designed my syllabus and my course. I did not originally design the course, though, to be a choose your own adventure. Like, I don't use that language with my students. That is a long-term goal. I would love to actually literally do that and have even more choice, but that's going to take like a sabbatical or something to do that. But I did realize after the fact, oh, the way my class goes, it is kind of like a choose your own adventure. So we'll stick with that metaphor. Now, another thing to know about the way that I teach, and I'm guessing the way that a lot of you all teach, is I try to make evidence-based teaching decisions. I try to be a consumer of the teaching and learning literature, and then, when possible, apply that to the teaching and learning decisions that I make. So I want to talk about, just very briefly, oh, my phone's ringing. That doesn't happen in a real conference. Sorry. I want to talk about 3 general bodies of literature just a little bit to show you why I made some of the choices I did. Some of you are probably familiar with these, but to get us all on the same page. Metacognition. So the word metacognition means thinking about thinking, most directly, right? It's our ability to think about the processes we use in order to do things. And specifically when we're talking about learning, it would be us thinking about how we learn, how we should study, how we should attack a project that we've got, how we should spend our time during a test that's going to be the most efficacious, things like that. Metacognition is important for us to know about as professors and teachers of college students, because the research shows that students who have stronger metacognition learn more, right? They do better on their grades, they do better on their tests. And this is not surprising, because if you know how to think about how to study and the way that your brain seems to work, then you're probably going to make better choices than if you don't. Another interesting thing is that the students who have the strongest metacognition actually underestimate how much they know and how well they think they're going to do on a test or a project. And the students with the poorest, the lowest metacognition, overestimate. So they think they're going to do better. And I'm sure you all have had this experience where a student who's done really poorly on something comes to your office hours and is just shocked. And that's partially because they might be lacking this ability to reflect on what they actually know and the strategies they use to get there. So because we have this issue of different levels of metacognition in our classroom, and particularly the students with the lowest metacognition seeing, the worst effects of that, I really want to be aware of that and trying to figure out a way to support that through my courses. So keep that idea in mind, that research-based idea in mind. Second one is autonomy, just our fancy psychology term for being able to make choices. This is coming out of self-determination theory, which is a psychological theory that attempts to explain why people are really motivated to do certain things. And there's a lot more to self-determination theory than just autonomy. That's one piece of 3 pieces, but I'm just going to focus on this one. And the idea is this: we're more motivated to work hard, to learn things, to persist in the face of challenges, to take risks, all those good things we want to see in the classroom. We're more motivated to do those things when we have some choice in the matter. When we got to pick the topic we're researching, when we got to pick the essay question that we're writing about on our test, we feel a sense of agency, a sense of ownership. And so people work harder. So this is why, for example, when we're talking about teaching K through 12 teachers, we tell them it can be a good idea to have students come up with the rules in the classroom, because you're more likely to follow a rule if you yourself created it. It's the same idea. It might also be why it can be a good idea to have your students help you create rubrics, because if everybody kind of came to an agreement, this is what we're working towards, then you kind of reduce any dissonance about having to turn things in for a grade. So I always try to figure out ways to inject choice into my courses. I'm only going to tell you about some of the choices as they pertain to my syllabus, but I'm happy to continue the discussion afterwards or at another time about choice in general. But it's an evidence-based thing coming out of self-determination theory. And then the last theory or body of research that I like to draw on comes from developmental psychology, and also applies to developmental adult learning as well. And this is the concept of scaffolding. And so the idea there, if you're not familiar, is that if we're trying to get a learner from point A to point B, it'd be really nice if they could just make that leap themselves. Some of them can. A lot of them can't, though. And so the better thing is to help them make the next step in their learning, and then the next step, and then the next step, until they eventually do reach whatever that course objective or skill is. But that a lot of times the best way to move learning forward is not to just show them exactly where they're supposed to get so they can replicate it or something like that, but to give them a small piece of support. Just like scaffolding structure on a building. When we're constructing a new building, we do that so that we can, do the next step, and then the next step, and then the next step. So that's the idea with scaffolding. And scaffolding is really important, particularly for the metacognition idea, because so many college students don't have the metacognitive skills we wish they had. They aren't perfect students. And so scaffolding becomes the structure we can use to help them get from where they are now, however far away it is from where we wish they were, the series of steps that they need to take to get them there. All right, so those are our 3 research-based ideas that I'm going to weave throughout: metacognition, autonomy, and scaffolding. So let's specifically kind of lay this on my syllabus. So I've got a screenshot of my syllabus just to kind of orient you to the types of, they don't receive paper, they receive this digitally, but the types of information my students receive. So looking at this here, this does not look amazing. In fact, I'm sure some of you viewing have amazing graphic syllabi or digital syllabi that would blow this out of the water. So I'm just showing you that I'm like totally human and do it a totally normal way. Until we get to the course schedule, that might be where we depart. As you can see, I've got the normal info. I do have a lot of memes. That's just a personality thing. That's just who I am, is memes. And so my students love to see that / roll their eyes at it. Fine. All right. So I also in my syllabus kind of tell them what I'm hoping they'll get out of the course. I think we all do this, but I don't do it by listing, 10 or 20 learning objectives or anything like that. I've really tried to edit down. And so all I hope they learn in this particular course is the thing in the blue oval, which if your screen's a little grainy, it says, how do I respond to difficult learning or classroom situations with evidence-based solutions? So in this class, they're all going to be future teachers, like we all are, ironically, right? And what I want them to be able to do is to look at a learning situation and analyze it and say, is this going to go well or is this going to go poorly? Based on what I know research says. And if it's going to go poorly, how can I come up with a fun, creative solution, but that is still evidence-based, that is rigorous and tied to research? That's all I want them to be able to do. I don't care what content they learn in this course. It's not a content course. This is a thinking skill course. So I just put that huge, like that's probably the biggest text on my syllabus is that. And I'm always coming back to that, so much so that by the end of the semester, they're kind of rolling their eyes about like, is this evidence-based or no? In a sweet way, which is kind of what I want, because that means they really got it. Oh, but is it evidence-based? So I just put that on the first page. I also have policies, like we all do. I'm happy to share this stuff later. I'm not trying to make an example of my extra credit policy. I just want you to see that I do, in fact, have policies in there. And I have the course requirements. I list out all the things they're going to turn in that are in some way connected to expectations or points. So up to this point, there's nothing new. Now, though, I want to show you my course schedule, what we do and when we do it and when things need to be turned in. which may or may not be different from the way you are approaching things. So the first thing is that I actually have my course schedule be completely separate from the syllabus. A lot of times we have it be the last page or pages of our syllabi, but if you think about the way students use a syllabus, they spend a lot of time with that front matter at the beginning of the course, getting used to the policies, getting used to the rhythm of the course, the things they're going to have to turn in. But then they don't need that front matter after a while. It becomes second nature. But they will always need to keep going back to a schedule to know what we're doing when. So I separate those, and my students do report they like that, so they don't have to either scroll virtually or flip through paper. So here we go. Here's a screenshot of the way I do my course schedule. The first thing that could potentially be different from a typical course schedule syllabus layout is that I'm using landscape function, not portrait function. And that's really just because I needed more real estate on the page in order to fit everything in that I wanted. Now you can also notice that I've got 3 columns. Oh, back up, can't click. All right, so I've got 3 columns here that are in slightly darker colors. Those are the days we're actually together in class. And then I also have columns for what they're supposed to be doing when they are not with me. Typically what this looks like in a portrait orientation is, you've got the column of all the course days, and then you've got the column of everything that's due. That's kind of the more typical one. And maybe you've got another column that's like the weeks, something like that. Doing it that way certainly worked for me as a student, but I noticed that that requires a high level of metacognition to be able to just see the list of what we're doing and what you need to turn in, and be able to deduce from that all the steps needed to get up to the goal. And so I wanted to figure, because I realized my students weren't being successful in that. People were not studying enough. People were not starting projects soon enough. They were not asking me for help, because some of them just don't know how to do that. And so I said, how can I communicate that to them? Well, maybe I need to tell them how to use their time when they're not with me. So that's what you can see here with the layout of the days we're together in the more saturated color, and then the between class times. Also, just as an FYI, I started creating all of my course schedules in Google Docs, so that it is a live editable document. So if we have a snow day, which we have a lot of those spring semester up here at Appalachian in the beautiful mountains, what I used to do back when I did it in Word or even in Moodle, in our Moodle site, is I'd have to go and completely change a bunch of stuff and upload a new document. Now, I can just edit it live, and it makes it much easier for me. So that's just kind of the general thing. Now I'm going to go detailed into some of the things that are in the different boxes. Before I do that, though, I want to tell you what my students have to say about this format. In order to get that information from my students, every semester, I collect data on them. I'm a scholarship of teaching and learning person. And so I just always collect data, everything, whether or not I even plan to present it at a conference, because I just want to have data so I can make evidence-based teaching decisions, just like I'm trying to get my students to do. And so I always give them a syllabus reflection activity on the second day of class. So the first day of class, we go over it and do that kind of stuff. And then the second day we come in and I have them tell me what they like and don't like. I know this is a little bit blurry. I'm going to show you actual screenshots of each part later, but I just wanted you to know that's where I got the student perceptions from, is this kind of thing. So if we want to look at some student perceptions just about the format here, everybody seems to like it. I've only had 1 or 2 students ever say, I prefer the portrait, the traditional format. So hopefully you can see some of this writing here. The student really likes it because it feels like a calendar. I didn't create it to make it feel like a calendar. I created it for scaffolding, but that was a nice bonus. This person likes the Google Doc part, which is funny because, again, I did that to make my life easier. And apparently it looks fun, which I don't try to create a syllabus to make people be happy or something or think it looks fun, but apparently they thought that. All right, so let's dive into some of this kind of scaffolding and things that I have going on. So focusing specifically on scaffolding metacognition, there's lots of different parts to effective metacognition. And the first part is planning. So before you have to do a task, whether or not it's turn something in, like a paper or project, go into class and take a traditional pencil paper exam, whatever it is, right, a journal entry, you should be planning the steps that you need to take in order to do that successfully. And as I mentioned, I noticed students weren't doing that. They were telling me they were studying the night before, they're starting the essay the night before, and their work was showing that that's what they were doing. So I have started adding in things like, you should start working on this paper. Now notice, culminating paper number 1 is due the following Friday. And I'm telling them, start working on it a week in advance. Now for a huge term paper, 1 week would not be enough, but this paper is only about 2 pages, 2 to 3 pages, and it's just a reflective paper connecting their life to research ideas. So it's not going to require a ton of outside research. They should be able to do this if they've been following along in the course. So a week is plenty of time. So that's one thing I do. I tell them, start doing this. That's what I think you should do. I also tell them when I think they should start studying. So you can see that I tell them to start doing it here on this Thursday, but that the exam doesn't open until the next weekend. Now, my exams and all of my assignments are completed and submitted online. And I'll tell you a story in a minute or two about why that's the case, but my course is 100% face-to-face. That's what it is on the books, but we do a lot of stuff using our Moodle learning management system. We call it As You Learn. So I tell them not only when to start working on papers and things that you might associate with homework, but also things that you might associate with class time, like studying for exam 2. And depending on the type of exam, I would probably tell them, like if mine were an in-class exam, I would be reminding them more frequently, review your notes, or giving them some evidence-based strategies for studying. But because all of my stuff is done at home and is open book, there's no need for them to do that type of studying, but they do need to start preparing to do the exam because it's a difficult exam. All right, so that's kind of how I help them out with some of the planning. And you can see I also tell them to continue studying. It's not enough to just start studying. You got to keep doing it, because that in and of itself is an evidence-based teaching and learning idea, right? All right, we don't have the best handwriting here, but I'll just point out that this student says, I am thick-headed, so sometimes it takes multiple styles for me to understand. I'm bad at planning when to start assignments, so this will help a lot. Okay, that's good. That's exactly why I did it. This person says this feels clear and organized. When I'm confused about what's due and when, I tend to struggle and fall behind a bit. So I really appreciate how explicit this syllabus is. Now, some of you might be hearing this and thinking, this is a lot of enabling. Just hold on that, because I'm going to address that idea. Like, maybe this is too much support. We'll get there at the end. But that's at least what this student says. I really like how clear it is. This one says, I know exactly what we are talking about in class and what I should be working on during my own time. So they also were mentioning liking to know what we're going to do in class. And I have an image of how the course is going to go. I didn't create this to feel like a picture and an image, but it's cool to hear that, because visual imagery in and of itself is an evidence-based teaching strategy. So that's cool. This person is kind of interesting because I think this person has good metacognition. So the second half of the comment says, the layout is very straightforward and easily plannable for someone like me who writes out the whole semester prior. So this person's actually on it. They already plan things out. But that says to me that this type of strategy is effective for the strong metacognitive thinkers and the weak, even though the weak ones are the ones I'm mostly wanting to help, but this person seems to like it as well. Okay, there are other things, though, that are going on in my syllabus. So in order to be an effective metacognitive thinker, you need to not only be good at planning your work, you need to be monitoring yourself in the course of doing the work. So asking yourself, is this study strategy working for me? Is this strategy to write this journal entry or blog post going to get me where it needs to go? Am I doing the right kind of reading, the right kind of homework to get me where I need to be? So there's also monitoring. And this is where I bring in the choice piece or the autonomy piece. Because again, students feel motivated when they feel like they have some choice in what they're being asked to do on the journey to meeting our expectations. So I need to pause for a minute on the syllabus and just show you how my course is organized conceptually so that the next piece will make sense. This isn't anything revolutionary, but again, here is that main essential question that I am hoping they will get out of the course. It's the main skill that I want them to get. And then I do organize the content that I teach into 4 units. These are not based on chapters in a book or anything like this. These are 4 conceptual units that pull from lots of different content sources that I think will help them get really good at the skill in the blue ellipse there. All right, and then underneath each one of those conceptual units, I've got a ton of mini units, right? This is the way a lot of people design their courses. And I do have some kind of culminating assignment. It's a case study exam that happens at the end of each one of these, 4 big units. All right, so for each one of those mini units, though, I do have learning objectives for them that are content-based, that by the end, you should know the answers to certain questions that are aligned to that mini unit, all right? And I share that information with them in our Moodle system. Just creating, I think I create like a page for those of you who also use Moodle. And the idea is this. So you can see this is a sample one. It's a screenshot from our mini unit on learning about long-term memory. And I've got 4 questions there that by the end of that mini unit, a student should know the answer to all 4 of those if they want to be successful on a culminating assignment that's at the end of the full unit. It's at the end of all the mini units, right? And so I give them, they have these 4 questions, but there's always between 3 and 5 for every mini unit. So this is where, and I think this is going to get to Michael's question that I just see there about choices and things like that. This is where the choice piece actually comes into play. So you can see that on the syllabus, I have some things that are labeled as required. So like here, required, you have to finish working on the culminating paper, but then you also have a choice, which is you could read some things, you could complete a web guide, you could begin studying. So the way this works is anything that is quote unquote required means that there are points attached to it in the course. I mean, that's not literally required. They could opt to not receive any points for those and not turn them in. But you can see, hopefully if you can read it at the top, it says items designated as required are typically assignments, and they must be completed by the specified due dates. But then we have these choice activities, which are not attached to any points at all, ever. They receive no points for them, which you might think they're not going to do them. And some of them choose not to, and some of them choose to. But I tell my students that the more, and I've got research on this, I can show them the correlation, the more choice activities that a student chooses to do in the course, the higher their grade. So I'm giving them that agency to decide which ones do I think are actually going to help me meet the goals. And for some students, they'd be good just doing one and they're going to get the A or the B that they want. That's just where they are in their own learning. Some students, though, maybe are lacking a lot of background knowledge or haven't taken a course like this before, and they're really going to benefit from doing a lot of different ones. All right, so let me show you what some of these choices relate to. And the idea is that with that, those 3 to 5 mini unit questions that I showed you back here, that you can do as few or as many of these choice activities until you feel like you know the answers to the web guide. Now again, I'm never going to collect it. I'm never specifically going to ask it. But they learn really quickly, especially after the first exam, that if they've done these things, then they're going to be in a good place to do the actual exam. For example, here's just a screenshot of the textbook. We use a traditional textbook that you can also get in a digital format, so students can use either one they want. And I tell them here are the pages that align to this mini unit. So you can read that. You could do the actual web guide yourself. which you might have noticed there are some hyperlinks in these web guides. You can click on these and it will bring you to all sorts of resources that will help you to answer that question. And so sometimes when you click on one, it'll bring you to something like an article. Sometimes it's a traditional looking journal article, although most of the time it's something more like this Scientific American article. So something that is from a reputable and rigorous source, but that is written more for a pop culture audience. Also, sometimes it takes them to a wiki that an educational psychologist has created or that the expert in the field has created. Sometimes it'll take them to a video where you're listening to the person who maybe wrote that chapter in their textbook actually say it on the screen. And so the idea is that students can look at these, because some students would prefer to get their information in varied ways and they find it more fun and more active to click through and get this information. But it's really in their hands. That's where the autonomy piece comes into play. Okay, so in terms of perceptions about the choice element, everybody seems to like that they're given choices and requirements. That's not surprising. This person says, they're talking a little bit about the format, but they say, I appreciate that information will be shared in a variety of ways. Right? And so everybody has some specific ways they prefer to learn, things that they have developed, you know, over the years that help them to study or help them to write well. They're, you know, pet methods. And the students really like the fact that I'm kind of respecting that and saying, you can use any of the methods. I don't care, right? The end justifies the means in my class, except for cheating, right? But as long as you can demonstrate that you've learned the skill, I'm fine with you selecting any way to get there. Totally open on that. All right.
Hey, Lindsay.
Yes.
I was just going to interject because you got a question in the chat window. Is it all right to?
Yes, and I did notice that I addressed it a little bit. Okay. Maybe it's just a linguistic thing with Michael's question about why did I choose the word choices versus encouraged. I have no reason why it's not encouraged, other than the fact, from a psychological perspective, something that is encouraged is being encouraged from somebody who has more power. And it's true, in any teaching situation, there is a power dynamic in which the professor or teacher has more power. And so when I use the word encouraged, I think it's more like you should do this, which is true, that's what I'm thinking. But the word choice seems to have more agency in it. So I think maybe that's why, although it's not like, Michael, I did not look at encourage, choice, which one. It's the first time I've ever thought about it. So I thank you for that question, because I am going to think about it more. And maybe I'll bring it to my students and ask them what they think about those words and if they care. I don't know. Appreciate that one. Okay. Hopefully you got to see some of this one that they like. The learning is really in their hands. I feel more excited about doing the homework and learning on my own than I would have if it were more rigid. Isn't that interesting? People usually aren't excited about homework, but that student was. All right, and then the last thing that I'll mention that relates to metacognition has to do with the final piece of being metacognitive. So we plan how we're going to approach things, some tasks. We monitor, how's it going? Am I getting where I want? And then after the thing is done, evaluating what worked, what didn't, so that I can do better the next time. So we need to encourage students to do that piece, and they don't seem to be particularly strong at doing the evaluating piece. They usually just look at the score and then make some kind of judgment based on that, right? So one other thing you may have noticed in here in one of the choice lists is something that says request level 2 feedback. And so this pertains to the way that I provide feedback on the work that students give me. Now, a lot of the work that I ask them to do is written, is short essay format, where they're reflecting or synthesizing or connecting their life to some of the concepts we're learning about. So it's not like, so feedback from me would not be giving the right answer to a multiple choice test. It would be about helping them to strengthen the quality of their thinking and their writing. So you can see I have something that says request level 2 feedback. So I need to tell you about my feedback levels. And this in and of itself is its own teaching idea. So this presentation is a little bit of a 2-for-1 because it's a grading thing, and like a feedback thing, and also a syllabus thing. So I approach any grading that is going to be more substantial than just short answer or multiple choice using what I call the feedback pyramid. This is something I developed when I made a change in my courses to shift more towards some of that higher level thinking, to require that of my students. Usually what happens when you do that, you also increase your workload as professors, right? When we start incorporating projects and longer papers and those kinds of things, service learning, all that stuff becomes a drain on your time. And so I needed to figure out a way for that to not happen. And so what I wanted to do was figure out how to match the feedback I was providing to the students I actually thought were going to use the feedback and needed the feedback, and then reserving some of that feedback for students who might not benefit from it. So I do 3 different levels. So let me show you each one of them. So level 1 is grading with a rubric. So this is a screenshot of a Turnitin rubric. So we have the Turnitin plugin to Moodle here at App State. And a lot of people think of Turnitin as a plagiarism checker. Sure, it'll do that. And I have used it to catch a couple plagiarizers. But that, to me, is like the smallest thing that Turnitin does. Turnitin has a really nice rubric and commenting feature, which you can also do with some of the basic Moodle stuff too, but I feel like the Turnitin one is really user-friendly. So this is just a screenshot. So anytime somebody submits, for example, like a case study, that's one of the things I have students do. They look at a teacher who's teaching poorly, and they tell me why, and they connect that to research. Like, this teacher is violating Piaget or whatever, you know, they connect to research and theory. So everybody, all 100, remember I've got 100 students, and they're writing these case study essays, and they're doing it 3 to 4 times a semester, in addition to a bunch of other stuff, just to give you an idea of the workload. Everybody gets this. So you can see in Moodle, you can just go through and you can click on the different levels, and you can see I've got multiple criteria, multiple levels of quality. So everybody gets that basic rubric idea. Everybody also gets this though. So this is a screenshot of somebody's case study essay where they're analyzing this teacher named Miss Deacon. And what I have done, and what Turnitin will let you do, is save common comments that you find yourself giving a lot on written work or on projects, something like that. And so I have gone through and saved them. This has taken multiple semesters to build up my repository of all of the different kind of stock comments that I might use, and I add a little each time, so I get better in my level 1 feedback each time. And so I will go through and quickly read this, and if somebody makes a common mistake, Turnitin lets you highlight it and then add a quick comment kind of thing, something that you've saved before. I don't type any original new, like just for that student comments in level 1, because if I have 100 students and I'm reading 100 essays every couple weeks, in addition to all of the other stuff they do for that course, and I teach grad students, which is a ton of grading writing, I just don't have time for that. I just don't, right? So at level 1 for my 100 students, they get comments that I have pre-saved. But the cool thing is it feels like they're getting comments that I wrote just for them, even though it's not. All right, so everybody gets level 1 feedback. Then I tell them, after they see their level 1 feedback, if after you look at your rubric, after you look at your comments, you're thinking, I don't know how to do better on the next case study, I feel like I'm not gonna be successful, all you need to do is send me, the student needs to send me an email that says, give me level 2 feedback. And I tell them this in class, and I say, get out your phones now, because we review feedback in class. And I say, if you are confused right now, send me a message, and I let them do it right then. And so I'll get a bunch of pings on my smartwatch, right, of so-and-so needs level 2. So this is what level 2 is. But the important thing is, level 2, you have to ask for it. So this is where the choice comes into play. But I encourage them, and I say anybody can do it. You could have only missed 1 point, and you want to know, where's my 1 point, right? I roll my eyes at giving level 2 to that person, but I do. Everybody can get it, as well as the person who failed the case study. Everybody has equal right, equal access to receiving more support from me. All right, so this is what I do. I open up their work, and I just put in way more comments. And this time they are personalized comments that are specifically about their work. So no more stock saved comments. Each thing is me specifically talking to them. And I try to go line by line about this gets you points, this didn't get you points, I like this, don't do this, those kinds of things. So it is much more personalized. I would love to be able to provide that level of support to all 100 students, but like when would I do that? It's just not plausible, so I don't do it. Each semester, or each case study assignment, out of my 100 students, about 20 request this. So it really narrows down my workload to really giving it to those students. And I might encourage certain students, depending on what they got, to request it and try to kind of empower them to request it. But that narrows it down to 20. And then after that, if they still don't get it and they look at it and they're like, I still don't know what to do, that's when we have a face-to-face meeting. That's when I say, let's come in, let's sit together in front of the computer, let's strategize the next one, so that you can improve on the next one. And I never have more than 1 or 2 students out of the 100 that really need that level of support. So you can see I'm giving tons of scaffolding, but scaffolding that is developmentally appropriate. And I have to say though, I created this whole thing again for me. It was so self-serving. I came up with the idea of adding case studies and projects while I was on maternity leave. And so I redesigned all my classes while I was nursing my child, because I'm not good at just sitting there with the baby. I had to have doing something with my Moodle course, right? But then I realized, oh my gosh, I'm getting ready to make my life really impossible with all this stuff. So I did it self-serving, but students love it. All of my evaluations, my class evaluations went up. They were already decent, they were fine, but they jumped up after I started implementing this, which I thought was interesting. So here are some screenshots from the infamous Rate My Professor. I just wanted to show you multiple places where feedback comes. And the reason I'm showing this is not to boast about myself. I'm sure all of you all have delightful Rate My Professors, especially if you are taking time out from your summer to learn about teaching and things like that. But what I do like is the fact that the most common like tags that I get now are either clear grading criteria or gives good feedback. And gives good feedback is the biggest, it's the most commonly selected tag for me. And it didn't used to be that until I switched to this pyramid, which is cool. And they say some of these other nice things too, but that's, and they didn't say that much nice stuff until I did this. So it's kind of cool. Grades also went up. I'm not showing you that data now because we don't have time, but, or those data, but grades went up too. All right, so that's kind of how everything fits together. The scaffolding, the choice, the metacognition, just from the perspective of my course schedule. Now, as I mentioned previously, before I jump into that, let me just show you some of the quantitative data. So now you can see the questions I actually ask them. So I've got some questions that are about, are other people doing this? Because I genuinely didn't know. That was just a thing I wanted to know. Is this similar to everybody else's syllabus? And then I also wanted to know if they thought that it was going to help them. So here I'm pulling out the 2 questions that relate to how my syllabus compares to other college course syllabi. And I thought that what I was doing was a little more novel than it is. And so all of your syllabi might look exactly like this. I don't know. But I have presented this at a psychology conference before, and people were saying they don't do the landscape thing and they don't do the in-between. Some of my students do have teachers that are doing this. I think there's a little bit of a bias in my sample because I'm teaching all education majors who are being taught by people like you all probably that are really into teaching and learning, or teachers, people who used to teach K through 12. So maybe a little bit of a bias sample. More important though is whether or not they like it and whether or not they think it will be helpful. And for both of those, they rated on the very true end, which is good. This is the first day of class or the second day of class. You don't want them to feel defeated before we even start. Now, of course, there's a lot of social desirability in here. They don't know me. They want me to like them. So tons of bias. But if it were very untrue, if it were on the other end, we'd have a problem, right? Okay, I'm going to skip this part so we can jump to one other issue and then still have time for questions. So another thing that I want to show you are some of the other random things that students put on this data collection thing. Remember, this is day 2. They do not know me yet. They have only had 50 minutes of me getting to know them and looking at the syllabus and stuff. And they write things like, 3 hearts. Who writes hearts on their syllabus? Wish more teachers would do it like this. I love how it's visual and separated and detailed. Okay, I mean, again, I wasn't doing this to get warm fuzzies from them, but that's cool. I really like how you ensure no barriers that students may have will get in the way of their success in your class. That's a pretty cool thing for them to take from just, 50 minutes with me and me giving them this course schedule. Definitely my favorite setup I've had. All right. The last bullet point here, I love how detailed you have it. There's no confusion, and I feel so good about this class. Now, of course, feeling good about a class is not sufficient to do well in the class. And you could also not feel well, or not feel good about a class and do well in it. But research shows that when you have positive associations with a course, you are more likely to sustain in the face of difficulty, take risks, those kinds of things. So hey, every little bit counts. If they're going to have warm fuzzies after just looking at a syllabus, that's great. And then this one, I didn't show you this question before. That's the thing I skipped over. But I thought it was kind of hilarious that they wrote best professor ever. They don't know me, right? But apparently you can communicate a lot about who you are and what the class experience is going to be based on the documents you give them on day one. So that was kind of empowering and cool to me. Okay, so let's kind of talk about the other side of all of this though, because you might be thinking this is super enabling of some of those poor behaviors that students are bringing to the table, right? Or maybe this is really like coddling them, like we're spoon feeding them. And as a result, we're producing this generation that is super problematic. And all you need to do is look at the popular media, right, to be aware of how we are characterizing the generation we see, right? So we can see this in the Chronicle, tons of commentary every other day about these entitled students that are showing up in our class. And isn't it true maybe that really spoon feeding them stuff through a syllabus is making them feel more and more entitled? Maybe. All right. We've got it in, Newsweek type publications that millennials are snowflakes, and they've even got data to prove it. You've got education magazines that are getting frustrated with students' relationships to technology and how they're not working hard because their face is glued to a screen. Inside Higher Ed, or American Students Lazy? If you read this article, it says yes, right? In PBS, right? And NPR and sources like that students are not prepared and the parents are making it worse. Yes. So this is kind of, to me, a lot of times it feels like this, right? This real, like, back in my day, this is not how students acted, and this is not what students were like. And I wasn't that type of student that was characterized. I didn't need this syllabus at all. I was fine. But some interesting things happened to me that made me change the way I think about teaching college students, particularly today. So us as teachers, this is how it's supposed to happen, right? We make some teaching choices, and as a result, learning happens. And in fact, a lot of us make really nice, rigorous teaching choices that we can defend with research, with scholarship of teaching and learning research, or with the science of learning research. And so we're very super intentional. I'm sure all of you, I'm preaching to the choir right now, right? We design wonderful learning experiences because the research says learning will happen if we do that. And then somebody comes in and messes all that up. Right? Students get in the way. Their laziness, their entitlement, their cell phones, their helicopter parents, all those things. We have this big bunch of not my fault, right? Meaning me as the teacher. This is not my fault. I'm teaching, supposed to result in learning. If it does not my fault. And I used to think that way until something happened. So I'll quickly share a story about the same exact EdSci class. So I used to give these case study exams that I've been telling you about, where they look at a bad teacher and they try to fix it. I used to give those in class. They would do 15 multiple choice questions, and then they would have the rest of the 50-minute period to critique this teacher in writing. And I started to notice an interesting pattern about the quality of the papers that were turned in, particularly the papers that were turned in at the last minute. They use every last second of that 50 minutes, or a lot of them use the full hour, right? They're getting into the next classroom or the next teacher's class period. I always notice that the top papers, the ones turned in last, right, are the best papers and the worst papers, right? And you can see why. It's the people who have the strongest metacognitive and executive functioning skills. They planned out their 50 minutes beautifully. They saved 5 minutes for editing. You know, they saved 5 minutes for brainstorming and outlining. That's what I would have done. Some of y'all were probably that student too, right? They got the best scores. And then it's the students who didn't get to the final, who didn't even answer half the questions. They were really weak metacognitively. They did not plan it out really well. And I got kind of concerned because I realized, you know what? These tests are measuring something other than mastery of educational psychology. They're measuring that too, hopefully, but they've got a confound in there. They've got bias in there. They're also measuring metacognitive skills, how fast somebody can think, how fast somebody can read, how fast somebody can write and organize stuff on paper. And I don't care about that at all in this particular course. That is not something I am trying to, that is not a skill I'm trying to scaffold. All I care about is they can look at teaching and be like, that's bad, and fix it. That doesn't need fast writing. And so I, from that point on, realized that I had a huge unnecessary barrier in my class, that certain students were not going to be successful, and it had nothing to do with mastery of the skills I cared about. And so from that point on, I kind of went on a crusade of trying to remove unnecessary barriers in my class. Now, not remove all barriers, because we also know from research that productive barriers are what lead to learning. But in that example, that story I just told you, that was not a productive barrier. And I'm also a stats person. Some of you might be stats people. And if you are, the idea of construct irrelevance might resonate with you. I realized that all of my assignments had a bunch of irrelevant stuff. It was measuring things other than the construct that I cared about. And so I've been on this crusade to remove barriers through consideration of construct irrelevance. And so that's how I got to things like the scaffolded syllabus, right? And so I realized that this whole box of I was thinking it's the student's fault, so not my fault, that maybe it's not their fault either, right? And maybe it's actually my fault. Maybe I'm making it worse. And if we think about our students and who they are in our classrooms and what they bring to us, we realize that a lot of what they bring to us is not within their control. They've been subjected to systems that have nothing to do with them, right? They might be who they are and the student they are because of the family, because of their peers, because of teachers they've had before they've had us. They might be who they are because they are products of the educational systems they've been subjected to, which may not have been optimal, because of the economies they've lived through, because of the political systems and the laws that are supporting the educational systems, not their fault. There might be overarching beliefs and cultural values. If you look at the way we educate versus the way individuals who live in Eastern societies educate, it's very different. And that's going to trickle down and affect that person, that student that we see in front of us. And of course, the passage of time is going to change this. And so I realized through that experience that really that bucket of not my fault, your fault, isn't their fault either, right? And so it changed the way I view my students and the way I structure their learning experiences. And so I'll kind of conclude with this idea. This was a comment I received after I started teaching this way. And this is back when students would handwrite their evaluations. It's all digital now. Now, I'm not showing this to boast, but I will say that the first time I received this, I got all, inflated, because the first sentence says, she's one of the best teachers I've ever had. And I was like, well, I'm going to put that in my 10-year portfolio, right? And then when I came back to read it again for some portfolio purpose, the second sentence hit me like a ton of bricks. If every teacher was like her, school would be a way better place for students. And I thought, what's happening in the other classes that would make somebody write that? Like, I'm even getting kind of emotional now because I'm so wanting that learning to happen for everybody. And if it's not, I want to fix it. All right. And so this student, I don't know who it is, they're anonymous. They drive everything I do now with my teaching and learning work, professional development work, and this work here, because I want to figure out this system. I don't care whose fault the box is, because this is working. Students are becoming more successful when I teach this way, and that is totally rewarding as a result. All right, so that's the scoop with my syllabus, and the hope is that when students take my class, what they thought might be the worst day of their life is hopefully the luckiest day of their life. All right, so we only have about 5 minutes before you're going to want to shift into your next one. So I realize that some of you might need to bow out from the room now, which is totally great, and take in some of this other stuff. But if anybody has any questions, I don't know if you're allowed to speak or if you just have to do it on the chat window, but I will look at that. I'm happy to take those. Otherwise, I can do a tap dance or something.
And if you prefer to use the microphone, we can unmute you as well.
Yeah, either way, anybody who wants to speak or show yourself. Oh, we got more people over time. Hi, friends. Somebody asked me a hard question. You guys are too nice. You know how in like a live conference, people always have like those gotchas? Maybe it's a little different in a virtual one. I will also say that, you know, there's a lot of other things I do in my course that I could label as scaffolding or choice, metacognitive support. And so I'm happy to talk about those. Oh, we got one from Jennifer Howard. Thank you. She said, did you overhaul all of this in one semester? No. And remember how I said I did this on maternity leave? If I hadn't been forced to be sitting, you know, holding my daughter for like 12 hours a day, I couldn't have done it as quickly as I did do it. I'm not saying so go get pregnant or go on, you know, family maternity leave or something in order to overhaul your courses, but that did help. For me, I always talk about this when I'm doing professional development for my colleagues. Teaching is a marathon, not a sprint. So just pick the one thing that you either heard from me or you hear from somebody else today, 1 or 2 things that you feel like are going to make either your life easier the fastest, because let's be real, teaching is about that too, or are going to matter the most for your students. Just do 1 or 2. Because I've been teaching this particular course for since 2011. Or no, I taught it in grad school. So I've been teaching it for 9 or 10 years. And I've taught the actual course itself. I've taught like 30 sections. So just keep that in your mind as you're looking at all these changes I've made. Do not do all that. Don't do it to yourself. Just do one little piece, one little piece. And then, because we're all trying to get closer and closer to teaching excellence, we never get there, right? It's an asymptote. Who cares where you are on the asymptote? Just another step, just another step. Oh, we've got another one. Oh, a couple other ones. Lisa says, I teach online, so this is probably more a problem for me than for in-person classes. But what about the students that you struggle to even get to read the syllabus or your feedback? Yes. So what I didn't have time for is to show you that with that level 1 feedback that I give everybody, Turnitin all of a sudden got a feature where it would show you who had actually read the feedback. That wasn't there the first time I did this. It all of a sudden showed up. And only 10% of my 100 students were looking at the feedback. Because, I mean, I figured out a way to use my time wisely for that feedback, but it still took time, hours. So what I had to do, Lisa, for that is to incorporate assignments that have points that require them to reflect on their feedback. And all of a sudden, once you tie points to it, people are more interested. Now, you said you're online, so you have to do it as, you know, some kind of asynchronous assignment, or you could do it as asynchronous, like get into a group and talk with people about your strengths and weaknesses. Since I'm face-to-face, we do that assignment in class together. Okay, what do you think about taking a bit of time at the end of the semester to talk with students about how they can take a traditional syllabus and turn it into the scaffolded syllabus like you use? So you want to get, Mary, you want to get their input, or do you want to teach them how to do it themselves? I think either would be cool. And I don't know if you'll, oh, I hear typing. Teach them how to do it for other classes. Oh my gosh, I think that would be amazing, particularly if you are teaching an intro level course, you're teaching freshmen and sophomores, or if you're teaching like a freshman seminar type thing, like that is such a great idea, I think. Or even if you're not doing that and you know that students are being unsuccessful and you've just decided it's going to be more important for them to learn that skill than for them to do chapter 15, I would do it. I would do it in a minute. But that's just how I view learning. Several of you are saying it was a depressing feature to look at. Yeah, I know. Isn't that crazy? I'm actually doing a whole SOTL project right now where I'm trying to figure out the best way to gently force students to look at their feedback. So hopefully I'll have a publication out on that in a little bit, because there's different ways you can make them look at it and different ways you can make them reflect, and I'm trying to figure out the best one. I'm working on that right now and in the fall. Yeah. I think. Oh, thank you. Thank you for these comments. Love it. Any other ones? Oh, that might have been all of them. Oh, we're at 12. I think is it lunchtime, Mary Beth? Is that right?
It is.
Okay.
12 to 1.
All righty. So you can go have lunch or hang out in one of the, aren't there lunch forums? Something like that?
There is one with Zoom that
Yes.
one of the Zoom reps is doing.
Cool. So you could go hang out in that and eat your lunch, or go eat lunch on campus or wherever you are, or maybe at home. I've been barefoot this whole time. That's the delight of a virtual conference. But I appreciate your questions. And if you want to email me, you can just Google me or find my contact info in the assorted things that you've received for the Free Learning Conference. But I look forward to continuing the discussion and hearing about how you guys use the stuff in your classes. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Lindsay.